Hi everyone, good afternoon, good evening, nice to see you all. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Leon Hilton. I'm an assistant professor of theater and performance studies here at Brown, and I'm also one of the co-conveners of the Disability Studies Working Group, which started last year with the very generous support of the Kogut Institute. So I'd like to begin by thanking all the folks at Kogut, Ben, Damien, Greg, Rachel, Amanda, for all of their support and help in making the working group possible. It's been really fantastic to collaborate in this way. So we launched in 2022 to connect faculty, postdoctoral fellows, graduate students, and undergrad students from across the university who are working on issues of disability and disability studies. I want to quickly let you know that we're having another event this next month, Thursday, March 21st. Camille Robesies will be here to talk about her book, Disalienation on Radical Psychiatry. So that's something to put in your calendar to look forward to. But this evening, I'm really delighted to introduce our speaker, Diana R. Paulin, who is the Charles A. Dana Research Associate Professor of English and American Studies and affiliate faculty in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Trinity College in Hartford. She is also the coordinator of Trinity's African American Studies minor and co-director of its Global Health Humanities Gateway program. She's the author of Imperfect Unions, Staging Miscegenation in U.S. Drama and Fiction from the University of Minnesota Press, which is the winner of the American Society for Theater Research's Errol Hill Award for Outstanding Scholarship in African American Theater and Performance. She's also the co-editor of the forthcoming MLA collection, Neurofutures, which includes her chapter, Autistic Blackness, an interrogative essay. She's also working on a monograph entitled Black Autism, Autistic Blackness, as well as a collaborative digital archive called Locating Black Autism, which she'll speak to us about this evening. And just on a personal note, I've just so admired and learned so much from her work over the years, so it's really a pleasure to have her here at Brown. So please join me in welcoming Diana Paulin.
Thank you, and I apologize again for my rock star entry late. And I also want to thank, Leon for inviting me. I like him. I am a fan of his work. He's a fan of his own work right now. I'm going to reference your essay on Avante's Law multiple times. It's so beautifully written and makes some really good points and is one of the sort of foundational works to really think about intervening in critical autism studies. So I thank you for that work. I also want to thank Ben Saffron. I don't know everyone else's names at the Kogut Center, but I know that it takes a lot of work to invite and set up an event like this, so thank you for your labor on my behalf. Okay, so I just also want to start off with the image that I have here, Blackness, Autism, and the Neurocolorline. I cite Jen White Johnson, who's actually a graphic designer. She's Afro-Latina, and she's a disabled parent and autism advocate. She has some really great work that she creates and distributes. She actually, there's her site here. She shares some of these images and also sells them. And I think it's really important to also support the work of people who are advocating and also changing the narrative around race and autism. Okay, let's get started. Blackness, autism, and the neurocolorline. How does it feel to be a problem? W.E.B. Du Bois introduces the souls of Black folk with this assertion. The problem of the color line, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. In his examination of, quote, the strange meaning of being Black in the US, Du Bois escorts his readers into what he characterizes as, quote, the deeper recesses of Black inner lives. These lives, he contends, are shaped by the dual positionality of being, quote, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body. Described by Du Bois as double consciousness, the Black psyche is constituted by the inescapable sensation of, quote, always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. This two-ness is distinguished by a line that separates Blackness not just from whiteness, but also from the world in which Blackness has functioned as the absence of whiteness, or has been equated with abjection. And although his study focuses primarily on Blackness at the turn of the century in the US, the concepts he develops, can you hear me if I move over? The concepts that he develops, I lost my place, are not confined to one national boundary or to one historical era. Instead, Du Bois's critical template applies to both white supremacist settler colonial logic that operated in the past to justify the violence of the Atlantic slave trade, Western expansion, as well as to the impact of their legacies in the present. The color line to which Du Bois refers to in his work provides a point of entry into my discussion of Blackness, autism, and the neurocolorline. Whether or not the color line is real or imagined, its cultural impact and its policing are real, as evidenced by too many examples to count in our history of discrimination, segregation, violence, and violence directed at Black and autistic people, as well as at Black autistic people. My focus on the Black-white binary does not begin to address other lines that divide communities, displace populations, and contribute to violence, such as the armed conflicts in the Sudan, the Gaza Strip, the Ukraine, and along the US borders, to name a few. The color line, to use Du Bois's phrase, belts the world. This afternoon, I will consider how these lines intersect the distinct yet overlapping histories of Blackness and autism in the US, and what we can learn by thinking about Blackness and autism relationally. First, however, I would like to situate myself and acknowledge the important work that has been done in the emergent fields of Black disability studies and critical autism studies, particularly the scholarship of Leon Hilton, the creative nonfiction of Anand Pralhad, which I will talk about, and various other important interventions, including essays, lectures, advocacy, and the online media presence of Black autists, such as Morenika Giwa Anawa and Tiffany Hammond. You might know her Fidgets and Fries website. If you don't, I recommend it. Additionally, I want to point out the very important work of the Black autistic pastor, Lamar Hardwick, whose book just came out. He's intervening at a time when the church and Christianity has really been employed to silence, to police, to deny women rights over their body, to persecute LGBTQ plus people. He is intervening in the Christian church's complicity in promoting ableism and fueling racism. And I'm just really interested in his work. He was diagnosed as autistic and later in life, and in his book he talks about that experience and really weaves it into a critique of Christianity from a pastor's view, which is, to me, really compelling, and a place where historically a lot of activism has happened. So the inclusivity of his vision, I think, is really important. I'm also building on the valuable representations and critical explorations of Black neurodivergence and Black madness by Terry Pickens and Lamar Jarrell Bruce. This list is far from exhaustive, especially considering my own interdisciplinary training and teaching, which has allowed me to build on the critical thinking with which I have engaged in performance and theater studies, literary studies, African American studies, and women, gender, and sexuality studies. Take a sip of this. Along with the academic arenas, my positionality is grounded in the everyday personal experiences of single Black motherhood, navigating the medical and educational institutions that govern the lives of Black neurodivergent youth and adults. And I acknowledge my privilege of employment, a place to live, and the ability to theorize about the precarity of Black autistic lives. At the same time, I also understand that I am always one misunderstanding away from possible harm. In a world in which unruly bodies, Black bodies or minds, can be easily confined or mistreated, I'm always aware of the vulnerability of those of us who can be perceived as dangerous, hostile, or non-compliant by the police or by anonymous 911 callers. In my experience, I have had to seek out labels that are required in order to apply for support services that are not guaranteed and that are underfunded and inadequate for many autistic children and adults. And I should have bracketed this that I have an autistic daughter who's 22. I also understand how labels can entrap and reduce people and their conditions. This is not a new concept in disability studies, nor is it a new concept in Black studies. The notion of labeling and naming is particularly fraught for African Americans, as historically and in contemporary culture, they are rarely employed as tools for liberation or agency, even when that might be the intent. The notion of embodiment is also central to disability studies, African American studies, and yes, even critical autism studies. So often, autism is described as an invisible disability, but the criteria for invisible does not apply to so many autists, especially Black autists. This definition relies on the inaccurate belief that autism impacts only white men, and it also suggests that autism is not embodied when many autists have demonstrated and described embodied manifestations of autism spectrum disorders. And even if one might not immediately recognize a neurocognitive difference, racial difference is often the first characteristic of note. In the case of my daughter, she is evaluated by her behavior and instances in which she departs from neurotypical behavior. The consequences of these departures are significant. For instance, adult programs, which I'm searching for an adult program, she's aging out of the high school system. The first thing they ask for is paperwork. They want her paperwork, which documents her behavior at school. This is before they meet her, and it is to determine if she is a right fit for the program. If there are so-called problem behaviors documented, regardless of the situation or context, she will not gain admission. And recently I visited a program which they met my daughter. They said, oh, we'd love to have her. She spent a couple hours there. And then they got her paperwork. And suddenly there were all these reasons, well, we have this, and we realize this triggers her, and it might not be such a great fit after all. And that is something that is not singular to my experience. I've talked to quite a few people who've had the same experience, and it's also a very underserved, underfunded arena for adults with autism. So, how can I support both my Black autistic daughter and neurodivergent Black son in a world in which the spectrum of Black lives is so often devalued or deemed inappropriate? What does it mean when the exclusion from programs transforms one's home into a carceral space? Does my race, gender, and neuroatypical perspective hinder or help? How can I use spaces I inhabit as an educator, advocate, scholar, neighbor, mother to intervene in the overdetermined narratives Black, autistic, and Black in the overdetermined narratives of Black autistic and Black neurodivergent lives, not just for my own children, but others who have or will experience similar types of inclusion and exclusion? How can a localized interrogation inform my attempt to both understand and identify Black autism, but also contribute to a more expansive counter-narrative that engages with the available stories to which I have access, the fragments and fragmented narratives, and that queer, disrupt, and fracture the coherence of mainstream stories of autistic lives? So I mentioned that I also am a literary person, so I'm going to give you a couple of literary examples off right at the start, and you may or may not be familiar with these texts, but one of the ways I locate autism is looking in places, sort of thinking about the ways in which it's been overlooked or misread, just like these bodies are often misread in these spaces on the street or on the playground or in an airport. If you're familiar with The Secret Life of Bees, there's a character named May. She's one of the three sisters. She's compassionate and emotionally engaged. However, she doesn't speak much, and her thoughts and ideas, her stories, her story is articulated on small pieces of paper that she inserts into the cracks and crevices of the stone wall in her family's yard. These stories are tucked away but not inaccessible. She responds with compassion to the world around her, but she also takes her own life rather than inherit the racist violence that she and her family experience firsthand. Now, this could be seen as the sort of fragility of being so connected in terms of your senses to your environment, but it also could be read differently as in recognizing those same qualities as being connected to a world versus disconnected, which is often a characteristic ascribed to people with autism. Or another example, in The Haunting and Haunted Daughter in Toni Morrison's Beloved, who nearly consumes her mother, whose, quote, thick love is deemed inhuman and heartless. She's not quite a refrigerator mother, but she is a mother who experiences the mother blame for manifesting this young woman who needs a lot of support. That's my lens looking at her right. And she literally is almost consumed by her. And I will talk about this author more, but Anand Prahad's memoir, The Secret Life of a Black Aspie, speaks to the spirits of slaves and documents the events in his life with a vivid, multi-sensory detail. I recommend the book. These ways of being in the world are so easily pathologized if they are measured against a white heteronormative neurotypicality. But what we can offer when we read through a different lens, ones that takes Black autistic perspectives into account, we can also consider different meanings and rereadings of characteristics, of acts, of movements that have been pathologized and policed. So that's a little bit about my sort of positionality. In order to start thinking about these ideas, and I know when Leon introduced me, he said my project is Black Autism / Autistic Blackness, and it is a work in progress, as is the title, because of terms, right, of labels, of names, and thinking about how we use language and what that means. So I want to start by talking about the terms and concepts that I will both employ and interrogate to talk about the intersectionality of race and neurodivergence. The first step is to move from these generalized classificatory terms, race and neurodivergence, towards the particular. The particular for me is Blackness and autisticness. I understand that even these more specific labels or names still encompass a broad spectrum of experiences, which is why Black, for instance, is referred to as the Black diaspora or as African American, and those are just two names, right? I often wrestle with how I should use the word Black. Do I capitalize Black, or is that too reductive? Do I reserve capitalization only for titles in the beginning of sentences? Because, and I'm going to cite Lamar Jarrell Bruce here, he explains that in his book, How to Go Mad Without Losing Your Mind, Black is not a noun. Black represents both classification and a lived experience. Similarly, the label autism describes a diagnostic designation as well as a way of being in the world. Yet, as Remy Yergo contends in her book, Authoring Autism, quote, "It is important to note the political difference that autism as a modifier and autistic as a modifier make. The former relates to the broader discourse on autism that is typically authored by non-autistic people, whereas the latter imparts that which is autistically created," end quote. In fact, she goes on to suggest that one cannot operate in between. You are either autistic or you are not. I wonder how well this question translates to Blackness. You are either Black or you are not. The contested meaning and the rhetorical power of Black, Blackness, autism, and autisticness is a debate that I will not take up fully here. However, the underlying fact that none of these labels can contain the fugitivity, to borrow Fred Moten's concept, of Blackness or of autism, nor do these labels encompass the full spectrum of the lives and experiences they include. However, these names, Black, Blackness, autism, autistic, are all defined and understood in terms of their distance from or proximity to identities that have been conflated. I must need some water because I'm getting conflated with compulsory normalcy and socially constructed ideals of capacity. In other words, the binarized positionality of Black and white are constituted by a hierarchy in which Blackness is located at the bottom and whiteness at the top. And autistic is always defined by the absence of the socially constructed and imagined ideal of neurotypicality. Both are located on one side of the dividing neurocolor line because they are defined by a lack or a deficit that denies them the considerations of full citizenship in the world of humanity. This neo-color line has been used to make all kinds of life-altering determinations that are linked to power and agency, such as the value of one's life, one's labor, one's teachability, or the legitimacy of one's emotion, one's fragility, one's dignity, one's pain, one's mobility, one's ideas, one's contributions, one's voice, one's stories. The list is endless. Despite the resilience of what I call the neurocolor line, the Black autistic lives it signifies remain nebulous and resistant to containment. Boundaries are meant to be crossed. The neurocolor line may not always be visible, but Black autistic intersectionality operates in ways that are already part of the fabric of our daily lives that must not only be acknowledged, but also included in our narratives of the past and the present, as well as our visions of the future. So, thinking about how I locate and where I can locate these Black body minds, but also the untold stories that they may unveil. Here, I use the word unveil intentionally to reference Du Bois's notion of the color line and his desire to lift the veil in order to represent authentic Black life. In my reference to the veil, however, I consider how neurodivergent ways of being in the world can be best understood in the context of lived experience. My goal is to provide a platform, a framework, a model for the untold stories of Black autists, not because I am searching for some lost identity or authenticity, nor do I want to liberate some trapped humanity housed in a Black autistic body, which is often the formula for parent-authored memoirs or stories, that this person is trapped, like the Clara Claiborne Park. It uses militaristic language. It's a siege. She has to find the child that's hidden in her child's autistic body. Instead, I want to consider the ways in which Black autism has existed. And I'm thinking aloud here, but similar to the way in which Toni Morrison talks about the notion of the Africanist presence. You know, in what ways does Black autism ignite enlightened moments in others, and in what ways can we find it in places where we haven't looked, or by focusing a different kind of lens on a particular moment or place or space. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier is the way in which I want to structure how I'm talking about Black autism. And part of it is to reinforce the importance of how Black autism should be incorporated into larger and more broadly construed social justice movements. So rather, I'm going to share, I already talked about why it matters. Some might skip this slide. This intervention in the normalization of anti-Black violence that often erases the complexity of Black autistic lives and the need for social justice movements to include and acknowledge Black neurodivergent lives. And part of my work is to challenge reductive definitions of Blackness and autism by amplifying the stories and experiences of Black autists. Okay, so I mentioned the refrigerator mother before, and if you're familiar with some of the early writings about autism, part of the blame was the mother, that educated and cold mothers didn't connect with their children, so it helped produce a child that was detached from the world. Not guilty. No, I'm just kidding. So this is from actually the 80s. It's a film called Refrigerator Mothers, and in the film, it's a documentary on PBS. This is actually the only, there's other women of color, but the only Black woman in the film, and she really sums up the criteria for autism in which she does not fit. So hopefully the sound is okay on here.
When Stephen was not even 2 years old, I was at the library, and the librarian said something about, we have some books here. Would you like to read something on autism? You know? I said, autism? The little things, according to this book, seem to identify with Stephen. The rigidity, the repetitiveness. The next time I was at the doctor's office, I asked if he thought Stephen had autism. And it was more than one doctor. At that time, it was a team of them over at the University of Illinois. And they said no. Said, it may be an emotion disturbance, but it's not autism. We did not fit the mold. We did not fit the classic mold for autism, which is white, upper middle class, and very, very bright.
Jimmy is an autistic child, 11 years old. His father is a specialist in nuclear power plants. Joseph is 7 years old. Both of his parents are college graduates. His father is a college professor.
It was really not a negotiable issue. According to my doctors, my son could not be autistic. I was not white, and it was assumed that I was not educated. And therefore, he was labeled emotionally disturbed. Here your child has a disability that you recognize. And they said, no, you can't be that. You can't even be a refrigerator mother. The irony of it all.
Stopped. Pause it. Yes, the irony of it all. And I think here you get a really good example of what now is a great disparity in diagnosis between white children and children of color. It's interesting, it is, well, we have one more day because it's 29th, the Black History Month, that I've seen a lot of articles about the different type, that more attention being paid to communities of color and early diagnosis. But when you sort of start talking to families about their experiences, even with the diagnosis, there's often not a lot of support, and advocacy is something that is very difficult when you're one person at a table with administrators and even teachers who might want to provide you or provide your child with what they need, who are told that it's too expensive. It's never supposed to be about the money, but it's always about the money. So Dorothy Groomer is a great example of what, and here I'm citing Chimamanda Adichie, The Single Story, and the danger of a single story of autism that erases Black autists and reinforces white supremacist biases about Black body minds. Another really powerful voice is Morenika Giwa Anaiwu, and she was one of the co-editors of The Weight of All Our Dreams, which is a collection of essays and articles, all by women of color, a range of disabilities, not just autism. And I remember when President Joe Biden mentioned in one of his speeches, I don't have to give my kids the talk. And the talk, he knew, or he had, been educated about how Black parents often talk about interactions with the police in the way in which you should behave in order to evade more trouble or escalate a situation. And as we've seen in the news, that doesn't always happen. But she's talking here about learning to navigate compulsory ableism in tandem with racism in her own experience as a Black autist, but also raising two sons with autism. And there's a performative aspect here in terms of her, she talks about masking and what she's had to do in order to navigate her workplace, being pulled over by the police, walking down the street, or even in social interactions. By not saying anything, by being quiet, she's perceived as hostile, right, or detached. So I'm going to play a little bit of her discussion. And you'll notice she has a fidget in her hand during the talk, and she also mentioned when she first came on stage that she was glad the lights were shining on her, so she didn't have to give any eye contact to the audience. So I think she's very instructive here.
In a certain way, oh, she's trying to stick out her butt, she's twerking, now you're this freak, you know what I mean? Like, you just can't be you, because, oh, I gotta watch how because again, some man might get turned on, because they don't have self-control, so whatever. So, it's just ridiculous, but so these are different things that you deal with, or being seen as not personable because maybe your tone is flat, or what have you, or just so many things. But I want to give a particular story of something that just recently happened to me. So I was driving, and in the car, I had my daughter in the car with me, and I got stopped by the police, because, Texas is how we make our revenue, tickets. And the guy stopped me. And again, there is lots of statistic about the disproportionate number of police stops if you're a person of color, particularly if you're black. And so he stopped me, and so he asked me to, step out of the car, and I did. And so I had this stimming toy that I have right now. I love this, sometimes it's around my wrist. I have this all the time. I'll be teaching at work, and I'll have this on. So I brought this out, and so now because he stopped me, I'm kind of freaking out, so I'm more like, instead of just kind of doing it like this, I'm kind of like, because I'm kind of freaking out, right? So he's like, whoa, what is that? And I'm like, oh, it's a stimming toy. What is it? What are you doing with it? I was like, oh, I'm just trying to calm down. And he's like, well, put it down. So I put it down. Now I don't have anything to hold, so now I'm flapping because I'm freaked out. I don't know, is you gonna give me a ticket? What you gonna do to me? You might kill me. I don't know. So I really hope not, but I'm just saying, anyone, traffic stops aren't fun, even if you just get a warning. You know what I mean? So this flapping that you all in this room just know is just me being an autistic, just doing my thing. When I don't have something in my hands need to move, loud hands. He could have perceived that as me trying to slap or hit or hurt him. People have thought of that before. And he could have gone, or he could have perceived this as a slingshot, or who knows, me just having this simple toy in my hand. And if I had a delay in auditory processing or answering, or if I engaged in echolalia like I do sometimes when I'm nervous, and if he had said, what is that? And if I had said, what is that? Like I sometimes do, then he could have thought I was mocking him. Anything could have happened. If I'm not making eye contact, you're being shifty. What do you have to hide? What have you. So it's like you can be in danger. This isn't just you're quirky, you're different, you're weird. This could put you in danger. There's research studies about where they've shown an African-American person shoving someone and a white person shoving someone and asking people, and it was perceived that the African-American person was shoving with violence while the other one was shoving playfully. These aren't just jokes. This is real life. Real life being black and autistic means you have this talk with your child. The talk in white communities is the birds and bees. The talk that I have with my sons is, and my older two sons are not autistic, they are neurodivergent. My youngest son is the one that's autistic, and my daughter. I had to have a talk with them about, don't wear hoodies. I'm just serious, no joke. No hoodies, no hoodies. If you're going to the mall with your friends, who's going? Javier, Daquan, and John, no, y'all can't go. 4 black people, 4 black and Hispanic people going somewhere, or 3. No, you can't, that many of y'all can't go to the mall in a group. They'll think you're a gang. No. You get stopped by a cop, you, yes sir, no sir, you give them whatever they want. If they're rude, hopefully they'll be polite. There's a lot of great cops, you know what I mean? But hopefully they'll be polite. If they're not, you take it. They spit on you, they talk to you crazy, you take it. We'll deal with it later. We'll make a report, we'll hand it through the proper channels, but you don't take justice now, because there's not gonna be justice for you if you do. I had to have talks with them about don't run. Don't, when you go to the store, what you don't wear and how you don't behave, so that you in hopes that this will keep you safe, and it still may not be enough.
Sorry, I did cut her off, but yeah. So there, it's as she says, it's not a joke, and I'm sorry I turned it up, but I didn't speed that up. She talks very quickly, but that encounter, which recalls like Sandra Bland, right? That encounter. In which your behavior can so easily be misread, and having to train your kids about these cues that can save their lives, hopefully, right? So one of the other areas in which I'm looking, besides some more specifically autism-focused arenas, is popular media. And I'm showing you this because it also echoes what she says, but it gives another gendered portrait of the talk. So hopefully it's the one I hope it is when I push this button. Oh, why isn't it going? Oh,
these are different things that you deal with, or being seen as not.
Okay, here we go. So if you know D.L. Hughley, he's a comedian, and he has a son with autism. And this is on the Oprah channel, and he was talking about his children and the talk.
When they used to tell me Kyle was defiant, what I recognized a long time ago is that defiance is what gets young black men killed. Because the most young black men who are in prison have learning disabilities. They are dyslexic in some way, audio or idio. They can't hear or they can't understand their process. 85% of men in prison. So to somebody of a different culture, somebody culturally different, that may seem mischievous or he dances to his own beat. Right. When it's our culture, somebody gets killed. And I knew right away that I would have to prepare him for a world that wasn't like the world she wanted for him. Like I was a coddler. And I was like, I can't let him do this because it will cripple him. It'll be, you could literally get your son killed by not getting him ready for a world that won't see him that way. So I think for a lot of his existence, a lot of his growing up.
Okay. For a lot of his growing up.
I failed him. I'm like, I'm not getting him ready. And I was scared to death that if you fail your son, he dies. He could die. Not my daughters, I knew they'd be all right. But I didn't know how to make him ready for this world and see it clear so he could see what's coming. Like everybody tells you, put your hands on the wheel or stay away from this or don't do this. Black boys don't get that kind of hurt, and you know it. So for me, it wasn't about vanity. It was about how do I make this boy ready for a world that, like, if something happens to me tomorrow, I know my son is going to be all right.
Mm-hmm. My name is Darius Mc.
Okay, interesting. I just also think it's interesting, his aside, he has 2 daughters. He's like, my son, I have 2 daughters, they'll be fine. Like, that idea, and not thinking, who knows what they're like, right? They're sort of, it's, this, and again, echoing kind of the different ways in which women often, and girls manifest autism, so they don't get diagnosed, and other types of neurodivergence. The research is gendered, the diagnostic process is gendered, and the visibility is gendered. Okay, so this is my last example of someone whose behavior is seen as dangerous. And I don't know if any of you know of Darius McCullum, but this is a documentary. It's just the trailer for it. As a child, he talks about Asperger's, so that used to be a category under the autism spectrum disorder. It's been changed in the new DSM, but he was bullied at school. He was stabbed at school when he was 14. He quit school after that. He didn't want to go back, and he liked trains. And he would hang out at the train stations, empty all metro transportation, and he learned how to drive the trains, the buses, and he loved it, and he was really good at it. And they sort of fostered it as well. Like, they would have him come, I'm like, I'm gonna be sick, can you run the trains for me? And he got caught and was incarcerated multiple times. And I will tell you that right now, he is in a prison for the criminally insane. And his releases, and again, I recommend the whole film. I'm sorry to just show you the trailer, but I want to just give you a little bit of information about it.
My name is Darius McCullum. Over the years, I have operated trains in the New York City subway system, Metro North, New Jersey Transit, and yet I have never been an employee of any of these agencies.
Well, a Manhattan man is getting a free ride to prison.
McCollum, said to have an encyclopedic knowledge of all things transit-related.
All of his crimes were victimless. He would safely make all of the stops, make the announcements.
He says, I'm volunteering my time, as if he's a high schooler getting community service hours.
Now, he's been picked up 20 times for the same thing. McCollum claims to have commandeered more than 100 buses for joyrides over the past 30 years.
McCollum has such a lengthy rap sheet of transit-related crimes, he has his own Wikipedia page.
Because I have Asperger's syndrome, I have trouble making friends. I didn't want to be bullied. I didn't want to be picked on. I didn't want to have to be beaten up.
When he was young, when he was assaulted, he lost that sense of value as to who he is. Wearing a uniform creates a sense of value for Darius.
It was like I was married to the MTA.
He can't help it.
My son, he doesn't belong there because he doesn't hurt anybody.
While he was in jail, he never got any therapy.
There's a possibility that I can definitely die in jail.
He has been stuck in this revolving door for his whole entire life.
He's an individual that corrections doesn't know how to handle, doesn't want to handle, and doesn't have the money or the support to figure it out.
Doesn't want to, doesn't know how to, and doesn't have the money for the support. And thinking about Darius, again, thinking about kind of the example we were given about the push. If a white young boy loved trains and was good at running trains, would they give him a job, right? Or what? And literally the judge said he was dangerous to society. And he was sent to Rikers, and as I said, now he's in a prison for the criminally insane. And it's interesting, the narratives around him, though, is that he didn't get help, he didn't get therapy, what kind of help and therapy? They wanted to cure him of his love for trains, right, and his passion. I love that image of him marrying the MTA because that's his passion. But he's punished for it and he's imprisoned for it. Daniel Tammet is a hero. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's a British working class man who he's a prodigious. He has a memory similar to the character Rain Man, right? And they studied his mind. He won a pie contest. Not eating it, but reciting pie from memory for the longest amount for like 5 hours, this continual. And, that kind of exceptionalism and praise is reserved for white people for the most part. And I can't erase Darius also from his class. And I mean, he didn't grow up with money, he didn't grow up with resources, and the lawyer that he had is the same lawyer who was court appointed. So there are other ways in which he's trying to navigate a system without any support. I keep giving you bad news. I promise I'll have some good news. Every time I push escape, I start it again. Oh, I didn't do it this time. Okay. More bad news. Okay, so these images, and I'm going to move through them quickly because I also know what time it is, but they're stories upon stories that I mentioned, sort of these headlines, so I'm just going to read, well, the headline is on here, that police shoot unarmed man in Florida. I don't know if you remember this story, but Charles Kinsey was the caregiver for Arnaldo Rios Soto, and he escaped from a facility, right? And the police, someone called 911 and said he looked suspicious, and he had a gun. It was a car toy, and the policeman shot his caregiver. The headline for this, I don't have it on here, but it was interviews of parents, but this young man had his license, and he could drive, and his name was Matthew Rushin. He's 19 years old, and he had a seizure and got into an accident. And they charged him with murder, attempted murder. They thought he was trying to commit suicide, and he was in prison. He was given a 10-year sentence, and his mother advocated for him, and the governor, this was in Virginia, eventually overturned the decision, and he was let out of prison. but the police were asking him, it was again, he was the one he was pathologized, even having a focal seizure, and there's evidence of that wasn't enough to absolve him of guilt. The other two people hit were really, really injured as well, but I don't know if the instinct is to imprison him and pathologize him and blame him. Another instance of a young man who was shot at State College in Pennsylvania. Same thing, he was having a mental health crisis. His father called. They knew who he was. I mean, if you've ever been to State College, Pennsylvania, it's a small area. And again, they were threatened by him, and they shot him. And it was a police officer who didn't know him. And this is the most recent in the news. This little boy was tased by the police, 14-year-old Avarius Thompson in Illinois, and he was mistaken for 3 young men with weapons. And they chased him. He was running to his own yard, like he had gone to the store to get something, he was trying to get home, and he ran. And they tased him multiple times. You can see his face and how frightened he was. And the police officer said it was mistaken identity, and was eventually fired from his job. But there's actually there's some footage of the police officer, and rarely do you see a police officer acknowledging what happened, although it's still in the framework of a power dynamic. Of who has power and who doesn't. So I said I was going to look for this, and I'm going to hope that I can. So now you're going to see my skills in searching, because I really wanted to show it to you. And my typing. And again, I'm thinking about this as well in terms of sort of the complexity of racial identity and what happens with the sort of power dynamics and misreadings, what it means to be seen as performing normalcy, right? And what it means to run. And I'm thinking again of your article about that idea, you're gonna flee. If dogs are chasing, you're gonna run. This idea that don't run. Someone's chasing you and you haven't done anything, that's gonna be your first instinct.
Leslie Johnson tells me he is the officer in the body cam video who tased the 14-year-old boy. Now, Johnson admits they got the wrong person, and he says he feels terrible about what happened, but he tells me he should not have lost his job over this incident.
At the time, I didn't know he was a boy, and I didn't know that he was, disabled or autistic. I didn't know any of those things at the time.
Former police officer Leslie Johnson was fired by the Dalton Police Department Wednesday after an incident that garnered national attention. On November 20th of last year, Dalton officers were called to help Riverdale police, who were searching for 4 black men with guns.
We observed 2 offenders fit the description, continued to run from us. I gave orders a couple times to stop, just continued running.
Get your hands up! Hands up! Hands up!
Johnson tased Avarius twice in what we now know was his own backyard. Is it your understanding now that this was a case of mistaken identity?
Yes, it is. Yes. We were later informed by Riverdale police that it was not him.
Now knowing that Avarius has autism, when you found that out, how did that make you feel?
When I learned that made me feel terrible, just because I have autistic people in my family. What still goes through my mind off of that video was the look on his face. That hurt.
Johnson tells me he stands by his decision to use a taser as a less lethal option. He says he followed protocol and should not have been fired.
All this time goes by, and you're telling me don't worry about it. We looked into it, you're good, everything's okay. And then all of a sudden, after that story airs on the news, now you want to take some kind of action and make me out to be the bad guy. I won't stand for that.
Johnson says he hopes Avarius and his family can find it in their hearts to not view him as a bad officer or a bad person.
I've been told you shouldn't apologize. You should, even if it was a mistake, you apologize for mistakes.
The village of Dalton tells the I-Team.
I know I'll let you meditate on that one, but you know, power dynamics are still power dynamics, and the use of force is something that we've seen regardless of whether he did or did not know he was autistic, did or not know he was a boy. Oops. Oh, because this is not from my, okay. The other, one of the other narratives around Black autism, and this is actually, I don't know if you know Holly Robinson Peete wrote a couple books about her son with autism who's, it's the arc, he's cured, right? He looks typical, I mean, according to her. But there are other narratives, and Autism Speaks is one of those places that wants to show narratives of success. I don't have the woman's picture here, but she's a Black woman with autism who is a doctor. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but one of the sort of lesson here is that if you work hard enough, if you do the right things, that you will be able to succeed despite your autism, right? Rather than embracing it, right? And she's saying, you know, I got married, I have 2 sets of neurodiverse grandparents, I was an outcast, did things late, acted like a boy. There will always be things I struggle with, but my autism itself is certainly manageable. Like that idea, sort of a very fixable medical model, right? And so I just wanted to point that out, that all Black autists, you know, aren't necessarily promoting the types of messages that aren't about cure or aren't about fixing one's difference. And then I'm not going to read this because it will make me cry, actually. But Elijah McCain is someone, and actually they just finalized the last trial for the officers and paramedics who used a carotid chokehold and overdosed him with ketamine. But he also, his mother taught him what to say, right? And he said everything that you can say to negotiate, and still his humanity was erased. And how many times he said, I was sorry, and the tape is just unbelievable. I'm just different, that's all, I'm so sorry. He was overpowered, and like other Black Lives That Matter deaths, Black autistic lives matter. Now, my last point I want to make or share with you is that there's a lot of creative voices and a lot of creativeness that isn't about resisting or having to mask, but about using words, using images, using dance, using music, because we all know that communication isn't just words. And that's another, you know, something like with Elijah, his movements in another context could have been, you know, the autistic grace, right? Because he was moving, not acting weird or strange, which is what the 911 caller said. But Anand Prahad, and as I said, I do recommend this book, talks about this intersection. He also talks so beautifully about his experiences growing up. He was born in 1954 on a former plantation. So he was born the year of Brown versus Board of Education, and on a plantation in the South, and he literally migrates to the West. But I just think here he echoes some of the ideas of Du Bois, so I'll probably stop here, and I will show you the link for my Locating Autism website that has some of these other voices and creative spaces that's still in progress. But being Black with autism, and especially growing up when I did, has meant double troubles. It's meant that often I don't know where one thing ends and the other thing begins. If I was among a group of white people and didn't understand what was being said, was it because of Asperger's or because of race? Usually it was both. Then, add on the fact that I grew up on a plantation in a family where almost everyone had neurological disorders. In some ways, though, this combination has helped to save me. Although I was more eccentric than anyone else in my family, I was still familiar. I still made sense to them. They could understand some of my dysfunctions because they had them to a lesser degree themselves. They very patiently taught me many simple things about how to get along, how to create a habit and live by it, how to deflect sounds, how to guess what people wanted. Some of those things were what helped slaves to survive, how to make a mask, how to scream silently. So I end with his voice because like this discussion of the intersections of autism and Blackness, it's linked to a history of pathologized Black bodies, and Fred Moten in, I didn't cite it because it's in a comment about another person's manuscript, but he says Black life is always neurodivergent. And I think given the history of silencing, as well as the legacy of enslavement, that's true, but we can embrace neurodivergence and find ways to represent the diverse voices that are also part of Black Lives That Matter. Thank you. Sure, and I'm gonna stick the site here is called Locating Black Autism, and so even locating it in the past, like there was an enslaved man. I'm gonna just go right here because I can't find. Thomas Fuller, who was called the human computer because he could calculate in the fields as an enslaved man, he could calculate how much seed they needed very quickly, and his labor he was owned. He wasn't able to profit from his labor and his knowledge, but it was something that was used and generated profit for the family that owned him. And the other person, he's not here, I don't need to show it to you, but Blind Tom Fuller, was a musician. He was one of the most popular pianists in the 1800s, and he traveled around the world, and his owners not only never gave him any of the money, he composed, he wrote, he performed. They also refused to ever emancipate him. And those are just some examples. Doing research at the Yale Medical Medical Center Library, there were all kinds of reports about different children talking about their characteristics, and that would have been probably the profile for the criteria for autism, but again, they were in piles of other documents. But I also want to think about the way in which Pralhad talks about neurodiversity and neurodivergence was part of the community, right? And going back, thinking more about it's part of our community, regardless of so many different arguments around de-incarceration and carceral spaces, which I know Leah Bamoshi spoke about really elegantly. But I will take questions and stop talking.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I don't really have, it's like a half-baked question, but it's based on a couple observations. So, like the example you told with the, in terms of the refrigerator mother, like it's a story about her being like, there's a librarian who thought that her son had autism, And then with Darius McCollum, there are people who saw him in the community, like loving trains, and kind of led to these opportunities or led to these people seeking things out. And the kind of tragedy of the stories comes to this kind of tension between these kind of communal affirmations versus like what's on paper, right? Which is something you brought up a few times. So it's half baked because I don't know exactly how to translate that into a direct question, but I do want you to say more about like what is the, I guess, like the communal or intramural navigation or even interpretation of Black autistic body minds, and how does that come into play with the often kind of violent mechanisms of what's on paper, or what's the protocol, or what's the law, and stuff like that. So, thank you.
Those are really great points and observations. And I think, I mean, those are actually, it's a really important part of my project that I'm still working on in terms of the affirmations and the communal spaces and the places where neurodivergence is embraced. I mean, I was thinking of a chapter on family reunions, right, with my daughter, because that's a space where she's included, right, and where I don't have to worry about where she is because there's always someone who loves her and cares about her. And I think that those kind of communal affirmations are part of what's going to change the narrative around autism and Black autism, but I also think it's intergenerational because there's quite a few stories about families that there's, you know, a stigma in Black families and warranted fear about the medical institutions because of a history of medical racism. What I've been told when I ask about those spaces is, oh, you have, as a parent, oh, you have to be creative and find ways to connect with other parents and, or find ways to survive collectively. And there are places that are collective spaces, but it's work, it's labor that needs to be done. And I do find that a lot of those that you said, that tension that comes up, it's often around kind of, not just around racial difference. Like there are not very many places. I mean, I live in Connecticut, so it's not like, but we have a large Black population, right, in Bridgeport and every city, Hartford, Stamford. So in those spaces, there are supports, but I think going back to that idea of thinking about Morrison and Toni Morrison's like Setha's thick love, that it is going to be love and compassion, which we've lost as a community in so many ways. That's going to provide, I hope, more opportunities for that. But you helped me too, you know, in terms of thinking about those affirmations. But it can be as simple as, you know, the librarian saying, oh, do you want books about autism? Or if you're in a public space and someone is having difficulty managing the sensory moments in that space and not judging, right? And offering a hand, or not offering a hand, just not staring at them, right? Or shaking your head or calling the police. But that is a part of the project that is really important. I mean, it's why I'm here, because I'm talking about people I love and care about, and also thinking about so many people as well. I mean, even my own, I said I was neuroatypical, I wasn't kidding, I got lost. No, sort of managing and thinking about even scholarship, like how do I present in ways that are accessible? How can I talk about this project to my family? You know, how can I talk about these ideas to friends? And then how can they advocate for themselves, or how can we advocate collectively? And it has to be collective. It's not an individualist endeavor. So. Thank you for that question, comment, observation, all three. Hustle, hustle, hustle.
You know, that's so funny. Everyone says that to me whenever I wear this sweater, which is hilarious. Let's see. I'm collecting my thoughts right now because okay, hold on. Let me think about things. One, thank you for coming. This is very helpful. I did get diagnosed 3 months ago, so this is a very I don't know, part of my process of just trying to educate myself and understand more about the life I've lived and am going to continue to live. And I guess my question for you is, well, I guess I have two questions. One is just what's the best way to stay updated about your project? Is it through this website, for example, that you have up here? Or how do we get more info, all that good stuff? And my second question, I guess, is kind of similar to the first person's, where I understand that change is collective and things like that, but how do you kind of manage having to be the person that is constantly educating? Because I think in Black spaces in general, it's always that side of okay, let's educate people about these things so that, we make some of the change and things like that. But I do find that to be kind of heavy, right? So I think that that's kind of my question. How do you manage both sides of just being okay, well, do I always have to be the one speaking about these things for people to care about it, or that sort of stuff? So.
Again, a really good question. The labor of explaining, it's exhausting, right? I mean, and I don't think that, I think that you have to take care of yourself to take care of others. And I teach, so that's my way. And I try to use that arena. So maybe those places where where you feel comfortable versus feeling the burden of in a class, or activism comes in many forms, right? And advocacy comes in many forms. And it can be exhausting, right? Being the one to explain and even derail the work that you're trying to do, right? If you always have to be the person to explain. So sometimes there's a recommendation of a book. There's some amazing, for children, there's amazing children's books. Every time I've ever taught The Secret Life of a Black Aspie, my students are that's the best book we read in the class, because he's such a beautiful writer. But it's so sometimes recommending, and there's so many books now that you can listen to that people don't even have to read, no, if they don't want to, But there's some great TED Talks, and there's some really, really wonderful TED Talks, Black Autism, if you put it, and you'd be surprised. So sometimes just refer to Google. No, I'm just kidding. Refer to YouTube. But you don't have to explain. And I think that's also part of kind of the expectation. How do you explain without getting defensive, right? Or how do you explain without personalizing it? And it's impossible. It's sort of separating one's Blackness from one's autisticness, right? They're interwoven, but there's some great works coming out, like I said, that I don't know if you knew Lamar, his work, but I was really struck by his work. And almost every person who has a book at that level has some sort of podcast or some other. Alt media is a great place. TikTok's a great place. I follow a lot of people on TikTok who just talk about, Black Autistic Kayla. She's talking every day about this is bothering me, or this is, or this is helpful, or this is what I embrace. So those spaces are really, going back to your, alt media is a really, there's a lot of, it allows people who might not want to stand up in front of other people, or who are already online, to use that space. So that is one of the things I would say. But also just get, you're, like you said, you're processing a lot, and that's important too. Give yourself time to do that. And now I really wish I had more positive references, because but like I said, all the weight of our dreams has some great essays in there, great essays. And as I said, there's some really wonderful talks on TED Talks.
Hello, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your talk. I noticed that you talked a lot about Black autism's place in the Black community and within like the global community as well. But I was wondering if what your research has, or what you have found on Black autism within the autistic community, and what other members of the autistic community can do to help make that a more inclusive space.
Thank you. That's a great question. And, well, I think in the sort of academic arena, it's not been very present, right? And that's why the Black Disability Studies movement and work, I have to look to very few people in academia like Leon who are doing this kind of work. So it really is sort of creating and constructing counter arguments and ideas, creative ideas. The idea of like affirmation is so important. And so you're helping just by asking those questions and by asking those questions, right? And, in spaces that are not inclusive, are not thinking about, well, how does this model of autism, think of every TV show, right? Like in popular media, I can't remember any of them. Normal. Yeah, The Good Doctor. Yeah, I can't, I'm drawing a blank right now. But, except maybe Love on the Spectrum. But, those are places those are one story of autism. And they're stories about success and overcoming autism to some extent. And there's YouTube shows that are show different people. So even looking for those things and sharing them. I'm not like I'm old and I don't know how to use media that much, but share it, like it, right? No. But it is something that's been raised a lot, and even people who I respect so much have said, well, I didn't, get your work out there so, so we can talk about this more. And they're not mutually exclusive, though. We already know that white is a race, right? So even talking about racialized autism doesn't just have to be the responsibility of non-white people, right? That whiteness is a race, right? So remembering that as well.
Hello, I wanted to thank you for speaking today. I'm a senior at Brown studying sociology, and I'm currently writing a senior thesis on the intersection of racism, ableism, and policing. And I'm speaking with a lot of parents of color who have children with ADHD and autism diagnoses. And I'm really trying to understand exactly what you were talking about, the talk that these parents have with their children about how to best interact with law enforcement. And I was wondering, as I'm writing up my thesis and analyzing my results, I just want to make sure that I'm using the most precise language possible. You spoke a little bit about the harms of using the term invisible disabilities, so I was wondering when I'm referring to children who have diagnoses of PTSD, ADHD, autism, what should I use instead of that language? And also in my write-up, I was wondering if I should use identity first or person first language, because I know there's a big debate about that in the disability advocacy space, if I should say like individuals diagnosed with autism or autistic individuals. I was just wondering what your take is on that, and just how I can be very inclusive and like precise in my language as I'm trying to contribute to this academic space.
Thank you for your question. I think that one of the things, the person first, for example, it's a debate. So I would maybe, that would be how I would introduce it, that, and you decide what you want to do and why you want to do it, but say that you recognize that there are different ways in which people want to be identified, right? And our language that's used, and you're out of respect. I mean, even how the parents that you're interviewing talk about their kids, or how the kids themselves. And in terms of what was the other part? Oh, invisibility. I just lost my mind. It's invisible. So yeah, invisibility. Well, I think again, if you define how you're using the term. I mean, when I was talking about invisibility, in some ways I meant it discounts other ways of in which autism is manifested, right? It's not just everyone isn't like the good doctor, right? And you're like, oh, you know, I didn't even notice. I mean, my daughter, you would know, right? And it's a whole nother part of this discussion is people who the sort of the divide between people who can advocate for themselves and say and describe their experience, and you might not know. So autism might be invisible to you as an observer, right? But then there are other people who you might not know it's autism, and there might be other it might be intellectual disability and autism or something like that, which is the case with my daughter. And that's it's visible, right? But often it's not visible that it's autism. There's something else, like people think that she's just behaving badly, or they think that I'm not parenting correctly. So I think with terminologies, it's hard. That's why I was saying Black autism, autistic Blackness. I'm wavering back and forth. That you talk about the importance of terms and your choice and your recognition that that's not the only way in which people identify. So you can say invisible if it's invisible.
Does this mic work? Yes, okay. Thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering if you could speak more about this project you're developing. I'm curious to know about how you're engaging with community-engaged research methods and bringing in Black autistic researchers into the fold, and if that's a part of this research project that you're doing, and sort of how you're navigating those conversations.
Again, a great question. So a lot of the collaboration that I've done so far has been with some of my students, and often students who are drawn to my work have a diagnosis, but I don't require someone to disclose it to me to work with me. The connections that I make, and again, as an emergent field, I've sort of sometimes had to just think about, well, how can I create community and find other people who are interested in talking about this at a place. I just was at the MLA, for example, the Modern Language Association annual meeting, and I was running back and forth between the disability panels and the Black studies panels, and I'm like, they're just not that's together, and that sort of bifurcated academic life, although there actually was one. So part of it's finding community, and then I feel that neurodivergence is pretty common, right? So I am interested in working with people and interviewing people. I belong to an organization called Autism in Black, and that's been they have an annual conference online. It's practitioners, it's parents, it's advocates, it's hugely diverse community, and you can go without having to travel. But I've met people that way as well. And I will say my project You asked about how you can keep up with it. You can email me, but also the Locating Autism, Black Autism site. But it's taken a lot longer because I also, have stops and starts. My project is not linear, and my thinking is not linear, and I'm taking fragments of ideas based on what I've learned from experience, but also from what's out there. So I'm really am building and creating as I'm moving forward. So every question like that is helpful in terms of thinking about who I would like to bring into the fold. And the site, actually, I see it as an interactive site where I want to create space for researchers, allies, Black autists to post, and it's not going to be my site looking out, but it's going to be hopefully both ways.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for everything. I guess is it a question? Not really. I can add the inflection at the end if that'll help. But in thinking about what you just said about thinking of finding new spaces to who would you like to collaborate with and creating that collective community, I couldn't help but wonder to what extent the legal sphere has come into contact with your research and your work. The examples that you shared in your presentation, most of them had to do with like intersections with either policing, which are governed by policies and procedures, or like the Department of Education and things like that. I myself am a third-year law student, and I can't turn that part of my brain off, and I can't stop but think of how that side of the spectrum is so gate-kept in terms of its effect on our day-to-day lives, and like truly creating such an environment in which anyone and everyone can thrive. And I just what your thoughts are if you've thought on that and stuff like that. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I've certainly been impacted by legal scholarship. I mean, thinking of obviously Kimberly Crenshaw and the notion of intersectionality. And I was fortunate enough to participate in a disability studies group that did bring together anthropologists, legal scholars, and there's some interesting work being done around disability and race in legal scholarship as well. And gatekeeping, I mean, and educational studies as well. I think about it is really truly an interdisciplinary endeavor, and I don't have a legal mind. No, I'm really, but I do think there are ways in which that kind of collaboration and that kind of connection across legal, in terms of legal studies, does work, because would be helpful. Because the more I think about it, it's the sort of legal scholars who have come up with some of the models, such as the matrix or the intersectionality model, which clearly lays out some of the, going back to that, what butts up against each other, the way in which these different axes come together. And it makes me think back about Darius McCollum, right? Policing, education, community, affirmation, but ultimately the medical and legal institutions are what determine his future, right, at the moment. It's good questions. I don't know if I answered it though, but okay. All right, thank you so much for your great questions.